Randy Crabtree here, recording at the Bridging the Gap conference. We're on day 2. We are having a great time. Everything is awesome and beautiful, and I am super excited, not only because the conference is going great, because I get to sit down with Terrell Turner. Terrell, thanks for sitting with me and talking today.
Thanks for having me.
How would I not have you? So we're gonna get into a few things today. We'll see where we go. There's lots of stuff to talk about. Day 2 of the conference. We're actually, in the afternoon, day 2. So we're almost 2 full days into it. Any impressions? Anything you're seeing? You're enjoying? You're liking? What do you think about what's going on?
Yeah, I think it's great because the energy is pretty high. People are excited to be here, and I think people are really finding a lot of value in the sessions. I think that the sessions aren't as much on the technical topic. They're a bit more on those types of things that people know we need to have conversations about, but nobody else is having them. Like yesterday, the session on vulnerability. Even though I was given a session at the same time, I'm like, I kind of want to be in that room too. But I'm like, I'm going to deliver my session. But I think that's what I'm hearing from a lot of people is the sessions are so good, and being around the people and the environment, the energy is pretty high in this place.
Yeah, I'm hearing the same thing. And for some reason, my mind wouldn't allow me to believe it yesterday, even though last year the same thing happened. Not in my mind. Everything was great, and every session was great, and it's different. We're hashtag not your normal accounting conference. I think that's the hashtag we use. And this morning I woke up and I go, I don't know what I was worrying about, because everybody's having a great time and everybody's enjoying and learning and sharing and collaborating and all that. So this is not your first rodeo at Bridging the Gap. You spoke last year as well. And you had your own session last year, correct?
Yep.
Did you do multiple things?
I did a panel and my own session last year.
That's what I thought. So let's just recap. What was last year?
So last year, I did the panel. We talked about, just different aspects of growing a firm, just, navigating that journey, what that was like. And I was on a panel with Don Brolin and Alnisha Jones, and 2 amazing firm leaders. Yes. And I think just 2 great people, even if they weren't leading a firm, I think they would still be awesome people.
Yes.
So being on a panel with those ladies, we talked about just the different things we're seeing in our firm. And I think we got a chance to be honest and transparent about, hey, some of the things we're figuring out, some of the stuff, it's a problem. We haven't figured out an answer yet, but we're on the journey. Yeah. And then the other session was talking about marketing and really how to leverage, finding your niche, finding who it is that you want to do business with. And so I really got to talk about, something that we've gone through that journey a lot and share some insight with people.
Yeah, and honestly, I'd love to dig into that, but we're going to get to this year's session because there's a lot we need to talk about that. But your niche, even though you said niche, and you are right, I'm sure it could be either way, but niche is a huge, passion of mine. I think everybody should find a niche, and some of the things we're talking about at this conference, especially tonight, is Josh Lance, who passed away shortly after this conference last year, and he built a niche practice around two client base, digital agencies and craft breweries. Okay. And so the fact that you were able to talk about that in the marketing session last year, I think is great. But you also are a niche practice, but you had pivoted shortly after you started. So just give us a short story on your niche and your niche journey.
Yeah, so right now we focus on law firms. So we provide bookkeeping, CFO services for law firms. That wasn't how we started. When we started, probably like most people, is whoever would pay us, that's who we were going to work with. Right. And I think over time, when we had worked with enough companies and we had talked to enough of them, we did what we call like this kind of niche finder kind of exercise. And it was one of the things that I talked about today, this year at my session is I actually gave all the people who were in the room, I'm like, hey, here's a free download where you can go through that same niche finder exercise.
Don't tell us the title or anything yet. So
no, I'm not going to spoil the title. Yeah. But I told them that we went through that journey, and what we found is there was some commonality between like the clients that we enjoyed working with, the people who paid well, and then also the people where there was overlap in interest, which made it easier for us to reach out to more people. And it came to find out like it was all lawyers were at the top of that list. And we were just like, all right, we're just going to really focus on who's at the top of our list. And so we went through that exercise. We decided lawyers and law firms were going to be our top of our list.
All right, that's awesome, because I think everybody should, and everybody does what you just said. You start your firm and you're going to work with whoever pays you.
Yep.
Bringing money in. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But we just talked about a satisfaction survey we did in the profession at lunch here today. And a lot of that satisfaction, where we found more satisfaction with the profession, where people were working in areas that they were passionate about and felt fulfilled with the job. I feel if you concentrate on a niche that you're passionate about, that's going to help your satisfaction level. So that's important. You also are big with marketing. You are... what do you got, like 82 different podcast titles out there between you and your wife, who is sitting over here. You're constantly on social media, putting great posts out there. I've often told you and talk about you and say how you can turn any situation into a business education session. It doesn't matter what it is. You could be, tying your shoe in the morning, and somehow tying your shoe can turn into how you do marketing. I mean, something like that. So you're much better at telling this story than I am. But when you were trying to decide what your session was going to be this year, or even before that, we were just talking in general about you creating sessions. So you tell the story of how this session came to be, and at the end, obviously, you'll tell the title of the session.
So this year was a very unique, different session. Now, I will say I've never done a session like this year's session at any other conference, and I've spoken at a lot of conferences. And so the way that came about is, I think you and I were sitting down somewhere and we were talking, and you asked the question of, how do you come up with the titles, or how do you come up with the analogies that you use? Yep. And I said, some of it is, I see something on television that connects very well, or having a conversation with someone, or this is something that's very relevant in that space. And then I was like, on a rare occasion, I will accept a challenge. And when I said that, I didn't expect you to have like an immediate challenge to give, because as soon as I said on the rare occasion I would take on a challenge, you were like, oh, I got it. You have to do Captain Underpants. And I said, how am I going to make Captain Underpants relevant to, I'm like, all of us are probably not watching or reading Captain Underpants right now. Like, that's not very relevant to accountants. But I'm like, you know what? I said I would take a challenge, so challenge accepted.
I honestly didn't expect you to do this. And I really didn't know you were doing it till I think a month ago. There was a post on LinkedIn or something, and somebody was talking about conferences, and you mentioned, I'm going to be doing a session on marketing with Captain Underpants at our conference. And so, but the interesting thing is, you took relevance of that and were able to talk about aspects of Captain Underpants and their marketing and who they were selling to, and turn that into, how do we look at this the same way? So I don't know if you can, in a few minutes, kind of recap how you turned Captain Underpants into marketing for accountants session.
Yeah, so first I had to actually go do some research, because I didn't really grow up watching Captain Underpants or reading any of the books. Like, the first time I had actually really heard of Captain Underpants was less than a year ago. One of my wife's friends, his son, asked me to read him a story, and I was like, okay. And he brings me a book, and it happens to be a Captain Underpants book. So my homework for this presentation became reading children's books.
Nice.
And watching cartoons. So it's I remember my wife came in and I was buying a Captain Underpants season 1. She was like, what are you doing? I'm like, don't worry, it's for business. It's just what does Captain Underpants have to do with business? And I'm like, don't worry, it'll turn out great. At least I was hoping that it turned out great. But I think once I started doing some research, there's a couple things that I noticed about Captain Underpants. One is they've sold 80 million copies. And I'm like, okay, if you sell 80 million copies of anything, like you had to be doing something right.
Right, correct.
And so when I looked at that, I said, okay, all right, what did they do that made them so unique? Because there's a lot of cartoons that came out, you know, in the late 90s. They all didn't do that good.
Right.
So when I looked at it, I was like, okay, all right, there was a couple things they kept it simple, like the artwork for the show, even the movie that they had that came out, you know, not too long ago, they kept the artwork simple. They didn't overcomplicate it. And for accounting firms, when you're doing marketing, a lot of times we overcomplicate it. Like we got to get all the technical detail in there. It's like your target audience doesn't care about all the technical detail. And so we had to figure out how to keep it simple. And then they just really had fun with the content that they were creating. And I asked everybody in the room, like, how many of you create content? How many of you actually have fun? And most people are like, yeah, we're not really having fun doing what we're doing. I'm like, you probably should take a lesson from Captain Underpants.
All right, nice. So those are the two of the aspects
Yes.
of it, and it went on, and I got to go in and out a few times. I actually went into the vulnerability one for a few minutes because I had to introduce them, and they gave me a cape, and so I wore my Captain Underpants cape into your session, and I saw you start laughing on that, but I thought this was appropriate. So you and I could talk forever. I love hearing your stories. I love seeing the way you do things and the way you educate, because you're constantly educating. So one, thank you for sitting down with me today. Two, thank you for being at the conference for the second straight year. And three, thank you in advance, and I haven't asked you yet, for being in speaking at the conference next year. And four, happy birthday.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
All right. And we're going to go, and we're going to enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks.
Absolutely.